Every conversation I have with billionaires, they rarely talk about money. They talk about purpose. They talk about mission. And so I'm just kind of curious on your side, what was that inflection point where you said, I need to focus more on my why rather than my wallet?
Yeah, it was probably almost 3 years ago, a little more than 2.5. My wife made a comment to me one morning, and it was like, "Hey, your breath smells like alcohol." And I wasn't drinking during the day, right? I was a heavy drinker, but I drink at night. I drink for work affairs. I'd come home, have a couple more, and it was becoming a problem for me. And that was the moment. It was just that was it, because I'd always wanted to quit. I knew it was holding me back. And that was the comment sent down from above through the lips of my amazing wife that sparked the change. And me getting sober after decades of abusing alcohol, let's be honest, it just gave me a clarity, and I don't want to say a purpose, but it gave me a clarity to finally identify what that itch inside of me had always been, that desire for more, that nagging feeling that I could do more, I could be more. But quite honestly, Mark, if we're being honest, I was so scared and afraid of the person that I knew I could become. Sounds crazy, but I just knew I was meant for great things from early on. But I had outgrown my environment so many times over through my life that I was just in a place where I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how anything in the suburbs operated. I didn't know how people acted at this level when they made this much money. And for me, getting clear and getting sober was the catalyst for the change that you see now if you tune into my social media or hear me speak or anything, like that these days. Yeah, getting sober for me was the ultimate catalyst. And what I realized is that I had found financial success. I had a daughter who was already 5 years old at the time. My son had just been born. We had this amazing house about an hour outside of New York City with no traffic, an ideal picturesque life on paper. And yet I was still very unhappy. And it's because I hadn't answered the call. I hadn't started to pursue those things that had been nagging at me for so long, those things that I knew I was capable of. So the mask of alcohol and that numbing agent was gone. And now I had to look the guy in the mirror and have an honest conversation with him and say, who are you? What do you need to do to become this man that you've been so afraid to be? And the last 2.5, 3 years have been just a journey down that path. But it's amazing how we're kind of just spinning our wheels. It's like revving up the engine with the brakes on, and then, alcohol was me pressing on the brakes, keeping me from making the forward motion that I could. I was always inching along, but not going at the speed that I could be.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of dopamine out there to distract, but it strikes me this is not a very good time to be complacent in anything. Right. Just because of the speed, and we talked about this a little bit too pre-interview, is the speed and the scope of which AI is impacting industries across the board. And I mean, I feel, to your point, when you're unhappy, you're going to try to fill that void with other things like drugs, alcohol, women, whatever. But now I think we're going to enter this new phase where AI is taking so much of what we're doing on a day in, day out basis that we're going to start to question, well, what is my value as a human being? What purpose? Because we equate so much of our personhood to what we do, not who we are. And I just, this to me is kind of terrifying right now, because there's so much happening culturally between the wealth divide, the haves, the have-nots. Despite having access to more information, people feel more lost. And it's crazy time. And I know I'm a little bit all over the place, but Sean, one of the things that I noted in preparing here is one of the things that you're really focused on is not necessarily the money to organizations, to people, but mentorship. So just briefly explain to me how do you actually execute on that? Why and how are you executing on mentorship at scale?
Well, you mentioned it to start the show, which was that billionaires rarely talk about money. They make their money through relationships. They've reached a certain point of the game where they know how to make money. They understand that it's a journey. They're at this stage of the journey. They have the resources and the relationships to get to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. But they know that that's going to take a decade or two before they reach that. I think when people are starting out from the very bottom, and that's where I wouldn't even say I started from the very bottom, because my mother always had a job. Though she never made $50,000 a year or more, my neighbors were at times generational welfare recipients, very few 2-parent homes. And starting from there, there is a sense of hopelessness. There is very little to latch onto in terms of, I want to be like that gal. I want to be like that guy. It's just, you're surviving. And I noticed that I had made it out. I had done well for myself on paper, but that unhappiness that I was suffering from was because I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have a clear vision. So by getting sober, I defined my whys. My immediate whys were my family. And even that for me was new. I didn't grow up in a nuclear family. My wife didn't grow up in a nuclear family. We saw dysfunction as the norm. So it's almost as if you climb, you hit a plateau, but then you get bored or you get this itch and you've got to climb a little more. And I say all that to say that the mentorship component has added so much to my life. Giving is truly living. I feel that once you get the chip off your shoulder by finding some level of success, it's on you to give back. That could be, obviously your immediate family or your immediate community. But for me, I come from a community of people of color, Black and brown, in the inner city of the Bronx in New York City, where those issues are plentiful, unfortunately. And there's
Can I ask you, Sean,
people
on that topic?
Yeah.
Because fatherlessness to me is a massive debacle right now. And it's the percentage of particularly young Black men that are growing up in fatherless homes is just skyrocketed. It's like 4x'd over the last decade.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, you're in this space. How do we solve that? How do we get more fathers in the homes of these kids so that they actually can? What was that old movie with Lawrence Fishburne, Boys in the Hood, where he says only a man knows how to raise a man.
And it's absolutely true. I mean, I was the product of a single mom. I didn't have good examples of what a man was supposed to be. It took me years and tons of mistakes. It took me going to prison for 2 years between the age of 29 and 31. It took alcoholism. It took drug abuse. It took, womanizing early in my days before I met my now wife. It took making all the mistakes because I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have guidance. And that speaks to the whole conversation of mentorship. And I'm realizing through my own podcast, most of the people I interview, whether they're aware of it or not, had the luxury of a 2-parent household, or even if it was transient and there was a stepdad for 6 years or 5 years, there was some male role model, male figure in the house, whether it be a female or a male, because that balance was what the universe and God designed.